Okay, it says I am live. So welcome to anyone who is here. If you are here and you can hear me, can you put into the chat that you can hear me? It's something I realize I have to check because last week I went live for the first time doing live teaching, and no one can hear me. So I'm going to check um, that I actually am live. So let me join me on that. If I click this link, let's see. It's for people to reset their. Okay. Yes, I can watch myself on live. Okay. Yes. Creepy. I can watch myself. Okay, great. So if you are here, it means you can hear me. And welcome. What I am going to do today is I am going to very quickly jump into KoBoToolbox, and we're going to look at data validation and skip logic. We're going to do it live again, so I'm not pre-recording anything. You're going to watch me do this live. We're going to create a KoBoToolbox form from scratch, very easy one with a few questions. But today what we're going to do is we're going to look at specifically where do you get started with learning data validation and skip logic. So what does that look like? Now, if you are just joining me, I am going to say that I'm in the midst of launching a brand new course, and it's called Mastering Form Design in KoBoToolbox. So I will drop this into the chat, like this website link, whatever URL, because I'm in the middle of this launch, and it's actually quite exciting. And this is kind of one of the best ways online to learn kind of from the basics through to the more advanced KoBoToolbox techniques. Yeah, so if you do want to take a look at that and you do want to learn KoBoToolbox, I do invite you to kind of check that out. I do have one more masterclass webinar on KoBoToolbox that's going to be next week. So if you're interested in hearing more about that, just drop into the chat and I'll give you some more details for how to register for that. But today what I'm going to do, so I was on a masterclass that I was doing as I was launching this brand new course yesterday, and someone asked the question, how do I do data validation and skip logic? And I thought, right, I don't have time to kind of jump into KoBoToolbox while I was live yesterday in the masterclass, but I do have time today. So we're going to basically jump into this, and we're going to take a look at how do we create something from scratch, focusing on validation and skip logic. So I'm gonna create a questionnaire, and I'm going to explain the basics of it. So I'm going to start a new project here. I'm in KoBoToolbox. I'm going to build this from scratch. So last week's live, we looked at XLSForm. How do we create a questionnaire from scratch in XLSForm? This week, I'm going to be in KoBoToolbox. We're going to be using the form builder, okay? And the project name, we're going to say Basics of Data Validation and Skip Logic. And we'll call this YouTube Live. Okay, so we are live, and that's where we're going to get started there. And I don't need a further description. I think that's pretty descriptive. Let's say we're actually doing some education here because I'm teaching. I'm in the UK, so I'm going to put that, and I'm going to create my project. So we've got our project started. Great. Hi, also Sanju. Is that Baba? Sanju Baba? Welcome. Great to have you here. Thanks for introducing yourself. And if anyone else is live, Shabani, I think, thank you. Great to have you here. So yeah, let's dig right into this. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a questionnaire that has a series of questions. Enter a number, any number, okay? The next question is going to be enter a bigger number, okay? The third question is going to be enter a smaller number. And the fourth question is going to be enter the same number, okay? So when we do this, we're going to enter any number. So we're not going to have any validation. When we ask, can you please enter a smaller number or a bigger number, we're going to create then a validation on that says, whatever they enter has to be smaller than or greater than or equal to the first number that they entered. Okay. So that's what we're going to do. And this is going to be a process of learning how to do that validation, right? So all we're going to do is say, enter a number. Okay. And they can enter any number they want to. We're going to add that question as a number. Okay. That's called an integer question. Okay. So we want a whole number. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add another question and we're going to say, enter a bigger number than, now I'm going to do something fancy here. If I put a $sign and open curly bracket, and if I go up here to the settings of question number 1, where it says enter number, I can actually copy there where it says data column name. I'm going to copy that and I'm going to put that down here inside this curly bracket. Okay. Close curly bracket. So I've got enter a bigger number than, and it's actually going to take the number that you first entered and it's going to put it in that question label. So that's going to be great. So enter a bigger number than whatever that is, 100. So we're going to add that question. It is also going to be a number. Great. So now we have 2 questions, but we're going to go into here. We're going to go into the settings and we're going to come down to validation criteria, right? So this is validation. And we want to say that whatever number we enter in here in this question, it has to be bigger than the number they just entered before, okay? So we're going to first click here, add a condition. This question's response has to be greater than, okay? Now, how do we say we want it to be bigger than this? It just says response value. So if we put 10, it just has to be bigger than 10. Or if we do less than 10, like it doesn't give us an option to make it dynamic to enter a number that's bigger than the first number we entered. Oh, okay, so this is where we're going to delete this, and we're actually going to say manually enter that code, right? Okay, if I delete that, see this big blue button, manually enter your validation logic in XLSForm code. So if you watched last week's YouTube live, we did XLSForm from scratch. This is essentially in the form builder, but we have to know how to write that, which is why understanding the XLSForm can be so important. So how do we write validation code? Well, the first thing you need to know about validation is what the dot means. So if I put a dot, a period, whatever you call it, a full stop, whatever you call that, that means the response to the question we're in right now. So the response to this question number 2, needs to be greater than, okay? And then we're going to do the same thing, this $sign, open curly bracket, and the data column name from question number 1, okay? Enter a number and a closed curly bracket. And that means the dot, the response to question number 2 has to be greater than the response to question number 1, which is called enter a number, okay? That is our validation. And whenever you put a validation, then put an error message. This number must be greater than the response to question number 1. Okay, so that error message will appear. All I'm going to do right now, I'm going to come up to here. I'm going to make these both mandatory. Okay, so as a general practice, I would always say to make all of your questions mandatory. So we're going to make both of these mandatory. We're going to save this, and then we're going to preview it to see if it works. Okay, so I'm going to preview this form. Okay, we're on YouTube Live, basics of data validation and skip logic. We're going to enter a number. I'm going to enter 100, and you can see enter a number, or enter a bigger number than 100. Okay, so it's already taken whatever number that I entered here and put it in the question label here. Okay, so you just saw me do that. What if I do 400? It now says enter a bigger number than 400. Now, what if I enter 100 here? Okay. Whoa, I've got an error all of a sudden. This number must be greater than the response to question number 1. So if I enter 400, I've still got that error, but if I go 1 higher, that error disappears, okay? So this is kind of the basics of how do you get a validation going. So we've got that. This is a number that's bigger. You might want to use this when you're asking income questions or when you're asking kind of any digit number. So if you're collecting health data or weights or anything like that in your humanitarian or development project, sometimes you enter a number and then you've got to enter a number that's bigger than that. whatever your data collection is, this is how you do it. Okay. Great. So that's working. Let me just jump into the chat here. I've been waiting for something like this. That's amazing. Okay, great. Hopefully this helps. Azam, Philul Bon, hopefully I've got your names right. And Sanjay, how to color font. Ooh, that's a good idea for a future live. I might do some markdown in the future. So I'm probably not going to do colored font today, but that's a great idea for next week. So I will write that down. Colored font. Maybe some text formatting would be super fun. So wait for that. It's coming. All right. So let's now jump in. So we've done enter a bigger number. Now we're going to enter a smaller number. Okay. We're going to do exactly the same thing. So enter a smaller number than, okay. And we're just going to make it super clear that we're talking about the number we entered in question number 1. Okay. So enter a smaller number than 400 if that was what they entered. Okay. We're going to do a number again. And again, when we go into the settings here and we come down to validation criteria, when you go to add a condition, you can now say less than, so smaller than, but then you have to put like a number, right? You'd have to put like 20 or 200, whatever. It doesn't give us the option to make that dynamic. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to manually enter our validation logic in XLSForm. And then we're going to write that again. Okay. Remember, the dot is whatever response they're entering in this question has to be less than or smaller than. Okay. So put that symbol less than, and then put the $sign, the open curly bracket. And again, we're going up to question number 1. We're going into the data column name in your settings, copying that and entering it down here into your validation code. Okay. And close curly bracket. So the dot of question number 3 has to be less than, because it's a smaller number than, enter a number, question number 1. Okay. And then our error message, this number must be smaller than the number entered in question number 1. Okay, great. And we're going to then make that mandatory, a mandatory response. We're going to save that. We're going to do one more, and then we'll do one more quick check here. Okay, so now we want to say enter the same number from question number 1. And then in brackets, we can put enter a number. Okay, so that's that data column name from question number 1. So now if they entered 400 in question number 1, we want them to enter it again, 400 in question number 3. Okay, or question number 4. Oh, I should probably number my questions. Okay, so we're in question number 4 now. Okay, so this has to be a number again. Okay, so this is another integer question. And then we want it to be mandatory. We come down to our validation criteria. Again, if you try to add a condition, it just, we can put equals, but then we have to put a static number. We can't put a dynamic number. So I'm going to delete that. I'm going to say manually enter my validation code. So dot is equal to, okay. And then we're going to put $sign, open curly bracket, enter a number, which comes from, that's the data column name of question number 1, and close curly bracket. Okay, so that's our validation. For each question, this must be the same number as entered in question number 1. Okay, now you can see that I'm going to get into hot water here when I'm referring to question number 1. What I'm going to do, I'm actually going to number these, because now all of a sudden, so 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now I'm going to save it, and we'll do one more test. Okay, I'm going to save this. Okay, we're going to go back into our preview so we can see, does this work? Okay, I don't know if my question is in line with validation as per today's topic, but forgive me if it's not. My inquiry is about the name column of the choices sheet. Okay, go for it. Ask the question, and if I can answer it live, I'll do it. And if not, I will respond to your comment. There has been a problem trying to replace enter a number with the X path. There is no survey element with this name. That's very interesting because now watch what's just happened. We go back up to here. It has changed my data column name to 1, enter a number, which means, so this is great. I'm glad that we did this. When we went to preview, because I added that number, it has changed the data column name to 1, enter a number. Now, I have used enter a number in all of my validation, right? I've got it here. I've got it here. I've got it here. I've got it here. And if you're ever doing something like that, and then you want to go back and change a name, what do? So all I'm going to do, I'm going to come back up to my data column name. I'm literally going to delete that. I'm just going to leave it as enter a number, and I'm going to save it again. Yeah, it saved that. So let's preview that. And that's just the, I have really broken Kobo. Now giving me a bad gateway. That's why live is so much more helpful, hopefully for you, because then you can see that things do go wrong, basically, even trying to make something basic. Okay, so enter number, we're gonna enter 500. Enter a bigger number than 500, 502. Yeah, that's working. What if we try to enter 452? It doesn't work, great. So 532, great. Yeah, enter a smaller number, so let's enter 0. Yeah, great. 2, 3, yeah. Now let's enter 4,000 and it doesn't work. So that's great. But if I enter 400, it does work. Great. And I would always encourage you, when you put those validations in, go back in, test them, see what works, see if you can break it. If you can break your form, that's great because you found a mistake, right? Enter the same number from question number 1, 500. So if we put 500, it works. If we put 501, it doesn't work. If we put 499, it doesn't work. Has to be exactly 500. Perfect. So that is validation greater than, less than, and equal to in an integer, in a number question, okay? So we validate that. It works. Everything's fine. We can get out of that. Now, how do you validate a date? So I'm just going to take a different question type. We work a lot with dates when we do data collection. Like if you work in a health field and you're looking at specific dates, if you work in, anything, everything is dependent on a date, isn't it? So, if we were looking at displacement or displaced people, we're often like, what date did you get displaced? When did you move? When, when we're looking at multiple displacement. So we have lots of things that depend on a date. If you get funding on a certain date, then maybe a certain occurrence had to have happened after that. So sometimes we work with static dates. A lot of the times we're working with what is the date relative to today, for example. So the next set of questions is what we're going to call our date questions. So what I'm going to do, actually, before I do this, I'm going to actually group these questions. So I'm going to hold down on my control key. I'm going to select all 4 of these questions. And then I'm going to come up here onto the left side of my screen and say, create a group. Okay. These are my number validation questions. Okay. And that is, I'm just going to call that my number validation question group, right? Okay, so now I'm going to make my new questions. These are then going to be my date validation questions. We're going to do exactly the same thing. So enter a date. Here's what I'm going to do. Yeah, enter today's date, okay? So we're going to add that as a question. It's going to be a date, okay? And what we're then going to do is say, enter a date in the future. Okay, so it'll have to be after today. Okay, so we'll add that question as also a date. Then we're going to say, enter a date in the past. Okay, so we'll add that question as a date. And then we will say, enter the same date as question number 5, okay? And that will be this date up here. Okay, so they're all date questions, but now we're just going to modify how we use them based on our validation criteria, okay? So enter today's date. Interesting question. Let's go into the settings there because today's date is very precise. There's only one date that we should allow them to enter here, okay? We're gonna make this mandatory. We're going to go to validation criteria and let's say add a condition. This question's response has to be equal to, well, I could put today's date, right? 2024-01, whatever today's date is, 23. Okay, I could put that as, but then it's a static date. It must always equal January 23rd, not actually today's date whenever they're entering that data. So what you're going to do is you want, again, to manually enter your validation code in XLSForm code, okay? And then you have this very scary empty box in front of you, like, what code do I write? So we're going to write, again, that dot, whatever today's date is, dot, okay? That's the response to this question. So dot represents the response that they're entering into this question, okay? So dot, and then we're going to say equals, okay? And then we're going to say today with two brackets, open bracket, close bracket, one after another, okay? So dot equals today. And today is just a function that will call today's date in your phone, okay? So in your calculator, whatever you're calculating for. Okay, so that's one way to do this. There is one other way to write today. Hopefully this doesn't confuse you too much. But if we go up to layout and settings, if you turn on the metadata today, it will actually create a question. And the data column name of that question is today. So if you have today turned on, you could also write this like this. Open, $, open curly bracket, today, close curly bracket. Okay, so that's how the other way you could write this. But that only works if you have metadata of today turned on. So if you don't, and for just to be on the safe side, we're just going to call this. Now, let's just double check that this is working. I always get a bit scared when I'm writing validation with dates because I feel like half the time they don't work. Dates just scare me as a person. They scare me. Dates and currencies scare me. There are things I'm like currency conversions, date conversions. Oh, anyway, that's okay. It's irrational. It's an irrational fear. I don't know if that has like, you know how some fears have like a phobia name? I don't know if there's a phobia of date conversions and currency conversions, but I would have that. Anyway, today's date must be today's date is our error message. Okay, so let's save that. Let's go to preview of the form. I'm going to skip these first 4 questions. We're going to go to question number 5, enter today's date. So let's enter tomorrow's date. That's got an error. Let's enter yesterday's date, error. Let's enter today's date. Bravo, we've done it. Okay, so we've written a formula that doesn't allow any date except today's date, right? So if we choose any other date other than today, it doesn't work. Perfect. Okay, so it's working. Whew, I can now calm down again. Right, so okay, so we've done that. Oh, I was going to number these questions, wasn't I? Boop. 5, enter today's date. Perfect. Okay, now what we're going to do, enter a date in the future. Okay, so I'm going to come down to these settings, the setting thing, enter date in the future. So we're going to make it mandatory again. I'm going to come to validation criteria. And again, that condition thing is not going to work for us because we want a specific validation. We're going to manually enter that. So we're going to say dot, which is whatever you answer to this question, whatever your response is to this question, has to be greater than today. Okay. Open bracket, close bracket, right? Date must be in the future. Okay, great. And then enter a date in the past. We're just going to go to mandatory, yes, validation, manually enter. Dot is less than today. Okay. The other thing you can also think about is you could be greater than or equal to today. So that's not necessarily a future date, but that's the other way you can kind of construct this is you can use less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, and then enter the same date as question number 5. Then what we're going to do here, yes, we'll make this mandatory, but in our validation criteria, instead of just saying it has to equal today, we could say dot equals, and then actually go up to question number 5, grab the data column name, okay, copy that, and we can use that as a relative reference in here. So we'll paste that, put a closed curly bracket, and then the error message says the date must be equal to whatever date is entered in question number 5. Okay, so we've got that relative variable name in there. So, okay, date must be in the past. Scary quotation or exclamation marks. Great. Okay, so we've got our basics here. Let me just number these questions again. So 6, enter date in the future. 7, enter a date in the past. And then 8, enter the same date as question number 5. All right, we're going to save this. We're then going to preview this. And hopefully, fingers crossed, it works. Okay, so we've got our enter today's date. So that's today. Enter date in the future. So let's try in the past. Let's try today's date. Let's try in the future. Okay, great. So that works. Enter date in the past. We've got tomorrow, which is in the future. So that's wrong. We've got today, which is wrong. And we've got someday in the past is right. So that's working. Yay! And then enter to whatever date. Now, whatever date, the same as question number 5. Now, if we go up to here and we enter the 2nd of January, so that clearly has an error on it. Let's just see what happens if we, in question number 8, put the same thing. Okay, so because these match, even though we've got an error on this, it's still, like, it's not giving us an error down here, right? If we put this date down here, we've got an error. But if we put the same date as what's in number 5, it doesn't give us an error because actually the validation we've put on question number 8 is holding true, right? It's not wrong. This is the same date as what's entered in number 5. And so that's something, you can kind of pay attention to, is that just because there's an error on question number 5, it's still the response and it's equal to it. So question 8 doesn't have an error. But we do this, we do that, and then we can validate that and everything is correct other than we didn't enter the first 4 questions. Great. All right. Perfect. So those are the main validation things I'm going to go over. I'm now going to quickly do just a basic intro to skip logic. Okay. So I've done number validations. I've done a few date validations. There's lots more depth you could go into, but let's figure out. Okay. So I'm going to just hold control down. I've selected all those. I've put them into a group. I'm going to say these are my date validation questions. And now I'm going to think about skip logic. Okay. So the way that we typically want to use or use skip logic would be with a consent question. Okay. So I'm just going to use that as an example. So actually what I want up here, I want a question up at the top that is going to represent my consent statement. Do you consent to being asked questions in our survey? It's a terrible consent statement. Please, we can do a whole other live on what your consent statement should or could look like. This is just a placeholder so you can put in your full consent statement. But I'm going to do that right at the beginning of my survey. Okay, this is my consent. Okay, I'm going to add that question and I'm going to make it a select one, and it's going to be yes or no. And basically, when you're creating a yes or no question, that's a great time that you can actually have a diverging kind of flow chart. If they answer yes, do this. If they answer no, do this other thing. Okay. So if they answer yes, we want them to answer all of these questions. If they answer no, we're going to put a question down at the bottom that says, thank you. This is the end of the questionnaire. Okay. Now, all I'm going to do, if I click here on this group and I hold down my control key and click here on this group, okay, I'm now going to put both these groups in an entire other group that's called my consent equals yes group. Now, you can name this whatever you want, but I'm just going to call it my consent equals yes group. I didn't want this in the group. So, okay, I will add it at the bottom because I clearly had that. Okay, I'll add that again. So this is the end of the form. Thank you. Okay, so we'll add that as a question. And this is just going to be a note question. Okay, so we don't want them to enter anything. It's just a note question. Okay, if they answer yes, they give consent, we want them to enter this group of questions. So I'm going to come into here in my settings of this group. I'm going to come to skip logic. Okay. And let's say add a condition. We're going to select a question from the list. Do you consent to being asked questions in our survey? If it equals yes, then it will ask all of these questions. Okay. Fabulous. That's it. Okay. So if they answer yes, then it's going to ask them all of those questions. If not, okay, so if they answer no, all of those questions won't appear. Okay. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to save that. And then we're going to preview it. Okay. Do you consent to being asked questions in our survey? All of those other questions have now disappeared. And we just have, this is the end of the form. Thanks. So if I say no, that will be the entire questionnaire. I can validate it. Okay. If I say yes, now all of these questions appear. And boop, 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 we can just very quickly answer them, a date in the future, a date in the past, the same date as today, and validate that. And everything is working. Okay, so that is how you do very basic skip logic, where we've got a group of questions and then we've applied a skip logic. You can do that with single questions. You can do that with groups of questions. You can see I've got groups within groups of questions here, and we've applied the skip logic to the entire group. Okay. Hopefully that has been helpful. I know it's been a whirlwind tour of data validation and skip logic as you get started, but hopefully this is helpful. I'm just going to go back to a couple of these questions. Do you recommend using the corresponding statement in the label column with spaces replaced with underscores, or using codes like 1, 2, 3 in the name column? Okay, I'm just going to answer this question really briefly because it's a great question. So if I get out of this, so we've saved this, I'm just going to download the XLSForm, and we're going to take a quick look at this online because I've got a couple of minutes. So why not answer this question? Where is it showing up? Okay. All right, so here's our XLSForm. This is the form we've just created in KoBoToolbox. And a really useful thing is just to go through this and kind of see, oh, when we wrote our validation codes, those came up as constraints, and these are the messages. It looks like these didn't save, but I'm not sure why. We can kind of take a look at that. Choices. Okay, so in the choice column, the question is, like, if the label was long, like, let's say this is non-food items. So say, what are we distributing to this person? And we've got non-food items like that, okay? In the name column, there are a few different options. We could say something like non-food items like that. We could say something like NFI, which would just be a human way, like that's a natural abbreviation that we would typically use for non-food items as NFI. We could also use something like, this was option 1 out of our list. So you could use a code like 1. My preference isn't going to be the same as everyone else's preference. So what I would recommend is think about how you're going to do the analysis and how you're going to be using this. Typically, I'm going to be, because I'm more of a practitioner rather than a researcher, right? So when I see the results, I want to be drawing them directly into kind of a visualization, like in Power BI or Excel, and I want to see what that is. I want it to be as understandable in my natural language. So my language is English. I want to be understanding that in English as quickly as possible without having to do a lot of post-processing. If that number 1 showed up in my visualization chart, I'm going to have to, create my, like, if it's 1, then replace with NFI or non-food items. Whereas very quickly, if I use NFI, I know it's a really short version. If I have a pie chart and NFI shows up on that, without doing any post-processing, I can actually see what they've answered. Okay. So now I can do post-processing, and I normally do post-processing then to say, like, oh, let's make it capitalized and let's do all of that. But if I'm trying to get a really quick grasp of what people have responded, I like to see those English names. Okay, so English or natural language understandable names. So that's my preference. If you're working with like a statistical software where you're doing analysis and you're not like it's a normal part of your processing to be using codes and replacing things, then go for code. So it kind of depends what is your post-processing preference. So that's kind of going to be my response. It depends a little bit. My preference is using something that can be understood in the natural language, but a lot of people will basically prefer, and you're using a lot less data if you've got loads of data coming in, using ones and twos and threes. So that's what I'm going to say to you. I don't know. Hopefully that makes sense. What do you think? If anyone else is listening and you kind of have a preference, feel free to share that. It's possible when first time submitted data, that second time, I want to read data show already submitted. Is this possible? Okay, I'm just trying to understand. First time I've submitted data, then the second time I enter data, show already submitted. Can this possible? Okay, so I'm thinking, yeah, yeah, hopefully that's helpful, Philu. Feel free to kind of also, ask around, see kind of what colleagues, that would be my preference, and that's what I generally recommend to people who are doing it with and around me. But again, I'm one person, so definitely see what works in your context. Would it be okay having the same codes in name column for responses of different questions? That's also a really good question. Sometimes KoBoToolbox doesn't like that. However, again, if you're post-processing and you know that that number on that question is equal to the right thing, in your settings column, you can have a, so go to your settings tab, and in here you can add allow choice duplicates. Okay. And this way you can actually have the same name, like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. You just set that to yes. Okay. And that will allow you to have, choice duplicates be the same from different, for different responses. So if you want that to happen, just be aware that, sometimes if allow choice duplicates is no, then that can help you catch errors, but hopefully that helps. And yeah, let's see. Do you recommend using the corresponding? So yeah, I'm trying to understand. I think Sanjay, and you can explain a little bit more if you want to, but if you're looking for the data that was submitted previously, you need to set something up called a data attachment. Okay, so it's a dynamic data attachment where you basically submit data, and then when you're collecting more data, you can reference the data that was collected before that. I do have a video on that, so maybe I'll just share that link so you can kind of check that out. It's not KoBoToolbox. Go to YouTube. So hopefully that's helpful. It's quite a complex. Here, it's this one, dynamic data attachments. So I will share this just in the comments here. Nope, that did not copy. I was like, enter a number, copy. Okay, let's do this. Paste that. Okay, hopefully that link is helpful for dynamic data attachments. Yeah, so hopefully hopefully that can help you. And I think those are the main questions. So I'm going to end there. Thank you so much if you were with me live today. I hopefully we had less errors than we did last week. We went live for the first time, or I went live for the first time last week. About everything that could go wrong went wrong with cameras and audio and everything. But it's been awesome hanging out with you today. I will also just remind you, if you are interested in learning more one-on-one in Kobo Toolbox, this is a course that's just opening up. We're starting in only 2 weeks' time, called Mastering Form Design in Kobo Toolbox, where you're one-on-one with me on kind of a weekly basis, where we do kind of group coaching. But it's a full walkthrough in terms of what are the key skills you need to master in Kobo Toolbox through using the design approach. So definitely take a look through this. So I'll just post that once more in terms of the link to the page where you can enroll. If you want to email me directly and we can set up an enrollment for you or your team separately, you're very welcome. Otherwise, I just want to say thank you. It's been cool hanging out today, and good luck with form creation. I hope that you are able to kind of get a glimpse into some new insights today, and good luck on your Kobo Toolbox journey, and glad to be hanging out. All right, see you.